Step into the dark with me. Listeners, settle in, lock your doors, and let the noise of the outside world fade away. We navigate our daily lives clinging to a fragile, invisible thread. It is the unspoken social contract, the baseline of human decency that dictates we look out for one another. Or, at the very least, that we don't treat human life as something disposable. We want to believe that the strangers passing us on the street share this fundamental understanding. But every now and then you peer into the abyss of a criminal case that takes that comforting illusion, shatters it against the pavement, and leaves you staring at the jagged pieces. Tonight, we are going to examine a collection of these fractures. These are the kinds of stories that don't merely disturb your sleep. They force you to confront the terrifying reality of what human beings are capable of when no one is watching. Or, in some twisted modern nightmares, what they are capable of when everyone is watching. Our first journey takes us to the sun-baked asphalt of Central California, the summer of 2017. The air outside of Los Banos was thick and heavy, but inside a moving Buick, the atmosphere was chaotic, reckless, and entirely out of control. Behind the wheel sat 18-year-old Julia Sanchez. She was highly intoxicated, her foot heavy on the accelerator, pushing the vehicle to dangerous speeds. But her attention was not on the road unwinding before her. In her hand, she balanced a smartphone, broadcasting her joyride live to her followers on social media. Sitting in the back seat, completely unbuckled, were Julia's 14-year-old sister, Jacqueline, and Jacqueline's girlfriend, Manuela. They were supposed to be on a simple road trip from Fresno to Stockton. As the Buick tore down Henry Miller Road, Julia was performing for an invisible audience. She stared into the glowing lens of her phone, laughing hysterically, singing along to the music, shouting to her viewers, and dangerously lifting her hands off the steering wheel. The vehicle was a heavy, speeding missile, and the driver was entirely consumed by the digital reflection of herself. The physics of a speeding car do not care about your social media presence. In a split second, Julia lost control. The Buick violently swerved off the asphalt. It plowed through a rusted barbed wire fence, the metal tearing at the car's body, before launching into a horrific, violent rollover. The car flipped end over end at least twice, a chaotic blender of shattered glass, crushing metal, and pure kinetic terror. When the violent motion finally ceased, the dust settled over the mangled wreck. Julia, dazed and disoriented, dragged herself to consciousness, but the backseat was entirely empty. Because they had not been wearing seatbelts, the violent centrifugal force of the rollover had ejected both 14-year-old Jacqueline and her girlfriend, Manuela, directly through the shattering rear window. This is the moment where any shred of human instinct should have taken over. The moment where panic, grief, and a desperate plea for medical salvation should have been the only priorities. But the live stream had never stopped, and neither did Julia's performance. Instead of dropping the phone to administer aid, she kept the camera rolling. As she stumbled out of the wreckage, her voice echoed out to her digital audience. "Hey everybody. If I go to fucking jail for life, you already know why," she announced. The tone bizarrely conversational given the carnage surrounding her. "My sister is fucking dying. This is the last thing I wanted to happen. Okay. Alright. I don't care though. I'ma hold it down. I love you. Rest in peace, sweetie. If you don't survive, baby, I'm so sorry." It was a chilling monologue of self-preservation and performative grief. Julia approached the broken body of her little sister. Jacqueline lay entirely motionless in the field. She had suffered a catastrophic, skull-fracturing injury. Her brain was visibly exposed to the California air. Julia aimed her camera directly down at her sister's face as her life slipped away. She broadcasted the gaping, fatal wound in horrific close-up detail for her viewers to consume. When she finally managed to dial 911, the operator was met with a chaotic, unhinged refusal to cooperate. When the dispatcher desperately pleaded for their location so they could dispatch life-saving paramedics, Julia's response was void of accountability. "I don't care where I'm at," she snapped into the receiver. When the operator begged for directions, Obd coldly replied, "I don't know. You're the government. You should know how to find me." By sheer luck, passing witnesses had witnessed the cloud of dust and dialed emergency services, guiding them to the twisted metal. But time had already run out. By the time the sirens wailed and the paramedics rushed the field, 14-year-old Jacqueline was gone. Manuela was rushed to the trauma center with severe, crushing injuries to her legs. When law enforcement approached Obd, she was a whirlwind of erratic, belligerent fury. She shoved the officers, spat venomous curses at the very people trying to secure the scene, and kicked an EMT directly in the face. She coldly referred to her deceased little sister as an effing toe tag, entirely consumed by the fear that her parents were going to kill her. She had to be physically restrained and hauled away. She was slapped with gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated and child endangerment. The live stream, originally viewed by only a handful of people, exploded into a viral, international nightmare. Millions eventually watched the horrifying footage. During her trial, her defense was a sickening masterclass in modern digital narcissism. She claimed she continued to stream her sister's agonizing death because she knew she had a large following, and it was the only way to crowdsource a decent burial for her family. Prosecutors saw right through the veil. This wasn't a desperate act of fundraising. It was a lethal manifestation of main character syndrome, a psychological rot where engagement metrics hold more value than the blood in your sister's veins. Ultimately, she pleaded no contest. The judge handed down a 6-year sentence. She served a mere 26 months before the state released her on parole. To the public, Obd Sanchez was the terrifying, physical embodiment of social media addiction. In later interviews, she casually referred to pulling her phone out as a reflex that entirely overrode the biological imperative to save her sibling. Her own family was shattered, but not entirely surprised. Her uncle Jose delivered a devastatingly blunt assessment. He revealed that he had warned her father years prior, when Obd was just 12, that a profound darkness was growing inside of her. "She's dead to me now," he stated to the press. "If she dies tomorrow, I don't care. She's a very bad person." The system's leniency proved fatal. Less than 30 days after her early release, Obd was behind the wheel again, leading California police on a terrifying, high-speed chase that ended in yet another violent crash. Officers pulled a loaded firearm from the wreckage. Yet, somehow, the gears of justice turned favorably for her again. By 2022, she was walking free. She immediately returned to the digital stage. The remorse was non-existent. She posted videos of herself drinking alcohol inside moving vehicles, flaunting luxury cars, and making sick, twisted jokes about her dark side. She openly mocked her sister's death on live streams and dared internet critics to drop a pin if they wanted to confront her over her lethal DUI. She sought confrontation, and eventually, the confrontation found her. In the freezing December of 2025, the cycle of violence reached its term and end. On a quiet residential street in Stockton, Obd Sanchez was gunned down in a drive-by shooting. Her body was found riddled with bullets. Authorities remained tight-lipped regarding the suspect or the motive, leaving the public to debate whether it was a random act of street violence or the inevitable, karmic conclusion of a life lived recklessly. It was a tragedy for a family that had now buried 2 daughters, but across the digital landscape she cherished so much, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone referring to the victim as an innocent soul. We pivot now, moving from the chaotic, selfish violence of a California highway to the sterile, cold, bureaucratic indifference of an international airport. Many of us hold a deep, protective instinct for the elderly in our lives. We desperately hope that when they venture out into the world alone, the strangers they encounter will treat their fragility with patience and dignity. But institutions are not people. They do not possess a conscience. Fermin Delgado Pindu was a man who had spent the vast majority of his life working the soil of Peru. Born in the spring of 1933, Fermin was universally beloved by those who knew him. He was a gentle, quiet soul, a devoted patriarch who found immense peace in fishing the coastal waters and embarking on long, wandering walks. His internal compass was legendary. No matter how far he strayed, he always found his way back home. By 2011, his daughters and granddaughters had migrated to Chile. Fermin, yearning to be close to his bloodline, packed his life and followed them, moving into a home in Peñalolén. Even as he crept through his late 70s, he fiercely protected his independence. He was sharp, highly lucid, and entirely self-sufficient. There was no dementia, no cognitive fog. In March of 2018, his daughter Lily was celebrating a milestone, her 25th wedding anniversary. Her husband had orchestrated a surprise family reunion trip back to the bustling city of Lima, Peru. When the 85-year-old Fermin caught wind of the excursion, he adamantly insisted on joining. He felt the heavy tick of the clock. He believed this might be his final opportunity to see his extended Peruvian relatives. Because it was a last-minute addition, Fermin's travel itinerary was fractured. He secured a seat alongside his daughter for the outbound flight to Lima, but for the return journey to Chile, the old man would have to navigate a completely different flight on his own. Lily was understandably fraught with anxiety. The labyrinthine chaos of international air travel is stressful for a seasoned businessman, let alone an 85-year-old traveling solo. But representatives for LATAM Airlines offered a comforting guarantee. They promised Lily that her father would not be left to his own devices. They assured her that the moment the plane touched down in Santiago, staff would escort him into a wheelchair, guide him safely through the complex customs checkpoints, retrieve his luggage, and hand-deliver him to the waiting arms of his family in the arrivals hall. Trusting the institution, Lily attached a physical credential sheet to her father's clothing, a piece of paper listing his name, his home address, and her direct phone number, hugged him tightly, and watched him walk through the departure gates in Lima. Hours later, at the Arturo Merino Benitez International Airport in Chile, several of Fermin's family members stood eagerly at arrival gate 4. Fermin's flight was scheduled to touch down at 5:30 p.m. The minutes ticked by. In our post, the steady stream of weary travelers filtered through the sliding doors, but the familiar face of the gentle old man never appeared. Because Fermin did not carry a cell phone, the family swallowed their rising panic, assuming it was a standard aviation delay. But as the first ob led into the second, the confusion curdled into absolute dread. They approached the airport staff, desperate for an update. The response they received was a wall of cold, unyielding apathy. The staff refused to even confirm if the LATAM flight had successfully landed. They barred the family from entering the baggage claim to search. They vehemently rejected the simple request to page his name over the intercom system. They just told the frantic family to sit down and wait. With nowhere else to turn, they called Lily, who was sitting in the Lima airport waiting to board her own later flight. Lily confirmed the horrifying truth. Fermin had boarded his plane. It had departed exactly on schedule. He should be standing right in front of them. For the next 4 hours, Lily sat trapped in a pressurized metal tube thousands of feet in the air, tortured by the unknown, wondering if her father had suffered a medical emergency or simply vanished. When Lily finally landed in Santiago, the nightmare remained static. The airport staff were just as obstructive. The family abandoned protocol. They fractured into search parties, scouring every inch of the public terminal. One relative stood scanning the taxi pickup lanes for so long that aggressive security guards physically removed her from the premises for loitering. It was during this desperate hunt that they stumbled upon a chilling clue. Sitting entirely alone in a wheelchair, tucked away in a corner, was a distressed, elderly woman. She told Fermin's family that she had flown in from Colombia. She, too, had been explicitly promised airline assistance, but the staff had simply wheeled her into a corner and abandoned her for hours. A security guard had eventually approached her and delivered a brutal dose of realities. "Ma'am, stand up and leave," he had told her. "They're gonna leave you sitting here for hours. They usually do this. They leave people here and never come back." The implication froze the blood in their veins. Had the airline simply dumped an 85-year-old man in the middle of an international transit hub and walked away? Under intense, relentless pressure, the airport authorities finally cracked. They admitted that Fermin's flight had landed perfectly on time. They spun a vague narrative about a baggage delay, claiming the old man had simply grown impatient, stood up from his assigned wheelchair, and wandered off into the terminal on his own. The anonymous employee who was supposedly tasked with his care vanished into the bureaucracy, never facing public scrutiny. But the silent, unblinking eyes of the CCTV cameras told the devastating final chapters of Furman's story. The footage showed the 85-year-old man wandering aimlessly through the cavernous terminal. He had no luggage. He paused frequently, slowly turning in circles, scanning the sea of rushing strangers, looking for a familiar face. The footage tracked him as he exited the sliding glass doors into the cool night air. He approached the chaotic taxi rank. An official, registered driver offered him a ride, but Furman, perhaps confused, perhaps unwilling to be a burden, politely waved him off. Minutes later, the cameras caught him approaching an individual wearing a high-visibility neon transit vest. Furman asked the question. The worker pointed a finger off into the distance. Furman nodded and obediently began walking in the exact direction the stranger indicated. That worker never came forward to explain where he had sent the old man. The final haunting frames of footage showed Furman standing patiently in line at a dark bus stop. After a long wait, he stepped out of the queue, turned his back to the airport, and simply began to walk. The path he chose fed directly into Route 68, a massive, dangerous, high-speed highway connecting Santiago to Valparaiso. The family rushed to the police to file a missing persons report. The authorities essentially shrugged. They refused to officially validate the report for 5 agonizing days. They told the weeping family to come back only if they had definitive proof that the old man was in active danger. LATAM Airlines washed their hands of the incident. The airport management deflected all blame. The institution decided that their liability evaporated the moment Furman stood up. For days, the family hunted alone. They plastered the city with flyers, knocked on strange doors, scoured hospital trauma wards, and checked the sterile drawers of the local morgues. The sightings trickled in. A security guard, who thought he saw an old man wandering near a metro station, heading toward Mapocho. But what the family discovered during their relentless search was a hidden, terrifying epidemic. As they combed the streets, they found multiple other disoriented, elderly individuals living rough in the gutters. And the stories were identical. These fragile people had been picked up at the airport by predatory, illegal taxi drivers. The moment the drivers realized the confused elderly passengers didn't possess enough cash to cover an exorbitant fare, they simply pulled over, dragged them out of the vehicle, and dumped them on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, leaving them to the mercy of the elements and the criminal street gangs that forced the vulnerable into begging. Furman Delgado Pindu vanished with a mere 9,000 pesos in his pocket, the equivalent of about $15. He was never seen again. Whether his heart simply gave out on the side of a dusty highway, or whether he was swallowed by the unseen, predatory underbelly of the city, his fate was sealed by the staggering, breathtaking indifference of the people paid to protect him. To this day, his family clings to a rapidly fading ember of hope. But the tragic reality remains: a beloved patriarch evaporated into the wind because the system simply didn't care enough to watch him. For our third case, we travel to the humid, manicured lawns of Florida. It was the morning of May 26, 1990. The setting was the Aero Club, a highly exclusive, eccentric neighborhood in Wellington where the driveways doubled as taxiways, allowing wealthy residents to pull their private aircraft directly into hangars attached to their sprawling backyards. Inside one of these affluent homes, 40-year-old Marlene Warren was enjoying a lazy Saturday morning. Her husband Michael was out of town on a trip. Keeping her company was her 21-year-old son Joseph, who was laid up with a broken leg, and a handful of his friends who had stopped by to keep his spirits high. The smell of fresh coffee and eggs filled the kitchen as they chatted around the table. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the conversation. Marlene stood up, wiping her hands, assuming it was a weekend package delivery or a neighbor stopping by to check on Joe. She pulled open the heavy front door. Standing on the sunlit concrete of her front porch was a figure pulled straight from the realm of the surreal. It was a clown. The individual was completely submerged in costume. They wore a wildly bright, multicolored, oversized clown suit, bright white gloves, and a synthetic, fiery orange afro wig. Their face was painted with thick, white makeup and a garish, classic red nose. In one white-gloved hand, The clown clutched a woven basket, overflowing with beautiful red and white carnations. In the other hand, they held two helium balloons. One featured a cheerful scene of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The second balloon bore a simple, silver inscription: "You're the greatest." For a few fleeting, confusing seconds, the scene must have felt entirely whimsical. Marlene likely assumed it was a prank, a cheerful clownogram ordered by a friend to cheer up her injured son in the living room. Marlene reached out, a soft smile spreading across her face. "How pretty," she murmured, accepting the balloons. They were the very last words she would ever speak. Without a sound, the clown raised a right hand. Clutched tightly in the white glove was a firearm. The clown pointed the barrel directly at Marlene's face and pulled the trigger, shooting her in the mouth at point-blank range. As Marlene collapsed backward onto the tile, bleeding catastrophically, the clown didn't run. They didn't panic. They simply turned on their heel and walked with a terrifying, measured calmness back down the driveway. Joe, who had watched the entire, horrific execution unfold from a nearby window, screamed and scrambled toward the door. As the clown approached a white Chrysler LeBaron convertible idling on the street, they paused. The clown slowly turned their head and locked eyes with the 21-year-old son. Joe would later describe the look to detectives. He couldn't determine the sex or the exact height of the killer beneath the baggy suit, but the eyes burned into his memory. Behind the thick white paint and the bright orange wig were a pair of dark brown, utterly soulless eyes. The clown slid into the LeBaron and drove away. Joe, hampered by his broken leg, was powerless to give chase. Marlene Warren was rushed to the emergency room, but the trauma to her brain was irreversible. 2 days later, as Joe sat weeping by her bedside promising that he would find the monster who did this, the machines were turned off. Marlene slipped away into the dark. The investigation launched immediately, and the physical evidence painted a bizarre trail. The white LeBaron was discovered abandoned in a Winn-Dixie grocery store parking lot roughly 8 miles from the murder scene. Detectives traced the VIN number to a local rental agency called Paylist. The agency had reported the convertible stolen just days prior to the execution. When crime scene technicians dusted the interior of the abandoned car, they found microscopic gold. Clinging to the fabric of the driver's side headrest were bright orange synthetic fibers, a perfect match for a cheap clown wig. More importantly, they recovered several strands of long, dark brown human hair. Canvassing the area, detectives tracked the balloons and carnations to a local Publix supermarket. The cashier vividly remembered the transaction. The buyer was a woman with chocolate brown hair and striking dark brown eyes who had paid entirely in cash. A nearby costume shop corroborated the description, reporting that a woman matching those exact features had purchased a full clown ensemble just a few days before the doorbell rang. The physical evidence was mounting, but the motive pointed directly to the inner circle. Detectives focused their crushers on Marlene's husband, Michael Warren. Michael was the proprietor of a local enterprise called Bargain Auto Rentals. However, the couple's massive estate, valued well over $1 million, was legally held almost entirely in Marlene's name. If she perished, Michael inherited the empire. The financial motive was glaring, but the emotional motive was even darker. Marlene had lived in fear. She had explicitly confided in her children prior to her death, stating with chilling clarity, "If anything happens to me, Mike did it." When Joe tried to comfort her, insisting his stepfather wasn't capable of murder, Marlene had coldly replied, "Don't put it past him." The circumstantial links to Michael were damning. In his local newspaper advertisements, Michael heavily utilized the phrase "pay less" in massive, bold font. The branding was so ubiquitous that locals simply referred to his lot as Payless. Given that the killer clown's getaway car was stolen from the actual Payless rental agency, it was a geographic and psychological connection too bright to ignore. But Michael held a trump card, an ironclad alibi. At the exact moment the gun fired on his porch, Michael was hours away, traveling toward Miami in a vehicle full of friends who swore to his whereabouts. However, an alibi only proves you didn't pull the trigger. It doesn't prove you didn't buy the gun. Detectives uncovered a deeply disturbing conversation Michael had engaged in with a lawyer a year prior. Michael had presented a hypothetical scenario, asking what would happen to an estate if a husband murdered his wife. When the lawyer explained he would be disinherited, Michael pressed further. He asked what would happen if a friend committed the murder, and the husband couldn't be tied to the conspiracy. The lawyer confirmed that in that scenario, the husband would walk away with everything, scot-free. The police shifted their gaze to Michael's inner circle, landing squarely on a 27-year-old woman named Sheila Keene. Sheila was an employee of Michael's, working as a repo agent for his car lot. She was tall, slender, and possessed a pair of deep, dark brown eyes. Officially, she had no connection to Marlene. They had never even shared a conversation. But unofficially, the entire town knew the truth. Sheila and Michael were engaged in a heavy, passionate affair behind Marlene's back. Sheila vehemently denied the romance to the detectives, but neighbors testified they saw the pair together so frequently, they assumed they were a married couple. Despite the glaring motive and the eyewitness descriptions matching her physical profile, the DNA technology of the early 1990s simply wasn't sophisticated enough to definitively match the brown hairs found in the LeBaron to Sheila. The clown suit was never recovered. The murder weapon vanished. The case went ice cold. But the brazen audacity of the crime lived on. In 2002, 12 years after Marlene bled to death on her foyer tile, Michael Warren and Sheila Keene officially tied the knot. Sheila underwent a bizarre, almost psychological metamorphosis. She dyed her dark brown hair bright blonde. She demanded people call her Debbie, effectively shedding her old identity. The newlyweds opened a burger joint in Tennessee called the Purple Cow. The rumors of her bloody past followed her, but Sheila didn't hide from them. She reveled in them. In a display of breathtaking, sociopathic arrogance, Sheila actually showed up to her restaurant shift on Halloween fully dressed in a clown costume. Employees noted it was one of the only times they ever saw her genuinely smile. For decades, the story of the killer clown of Weddington was traded as a dark, suburban urban legend. But Joe Warren never forgot the soulless eyes. He battled severe substance abuse, struggling to drown the trauma of watching his mother murdered, until he finally fought his way to sobriety, demanding justice. In 2014, the dawn of advanced forensic genealogy changed the game. The Palm Beach County Cold Case Unit cracked the evidence boxes open. Using modern technology, they tested the strands of brown hair recovered from the driver's seat of the LeBaron. The DNA was a definitive, absolute match. It was Sheila Keene Warren. In September of 2017, 27 years after the gunshot rang out, heavily armed agents surrounded Sheila in Virginia and slapped the cuffs on her wrists. She was extradited back to Florida to face first-degree murder charges. But the justice system is a machine of compromise. In April of 2023, facing a mountain of delays and the threat of a death penalty trial, prosecutors offered a plea deal. Sheila pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The judge handed down a 12-year sentence. But due to a complex web of time served and good behavior credits, Sheila Keene Warren walked out of the prison gates a free woman in November of 2024, having served a mere 18 months behind bars for executing an innocent woman. The most chilling aspect of the crime remains the psychological warfare of the costume itself. Why a clown? Marlene Warren loved clowns. She painted portraits of them. Her home was decorated with small clown statuettes. It was a well-known, personal joy of hers. Sheila Keene, a woman who had never met Marlene, somehow acquired this incredibly intimate detail. Did Michael tell her? Was the costume chosen to disarm the wife, ensuring she opened the door with a smile? Or was it a final, malicious act of cruelty, a mistress ensuring that her rival's final waking moment was a twisted mockery of something she loved? Michael Warren was never charged. The conspiracy remains unproven in the eyes of the law. But the question lingers in the Florida humidity, unresolved and deeply unsettling. We close tonight's episode by plunging into the suffocating, humid depths of a South Carolina summer. The year is 1985. 17-year-old Shari Faye Smith, known affectionately to everyone simply as Shari, was the quintessential girl next door. She was quiet, highly dependable, and a creature of comforting routines. It was the afternoon of May 31st. Shari had just left a lively high school pool party, driving her car back to her family's home on Lake Murray Boulevard in Lexington County. At 3:38 p.m., Shari's father, Bob, glanced out the front window of the house then. He saw his daughter's car successfully pull into the long, gravel driveway, coming to a stop directly beside the roadside mailbox. Satisfied she was home, Bob turned away to continue his afternoon, fully expecting the front door to open within seconds. 5 minutes ticked by. The house remained silent. Confused, Bob walked out the front door and down the driveway. Sherry's car was idling. The engine was humming smoothly. The driver's side door was swung wide open. The mail was scattered haphazardly across the dirt around the mailbox. Sitting undisturbed on the passenger seat was Sherry's purse, and most alarmingly, her critical diabetes medication, a lifeline she would never with her husband, under any circumstances willingly abandon. But the 17-year-old girl had vanished into thin air. Bob and his wife, Hilda, frantically dialed the police. The agonizing, suffocating panic of a missing child descended upon the house then. For 2 days, they lived in a silent hell. And then, the phone rang. The voice on the other end of the line was male. It was incredibly calm, meticulously measured, but heavily distorted, likely muffled by a rag or an electronic device over the receiver. The caller stated simply that he had kidnapped Sherry, but offered a cruel sliver of hope. He claimed she was still alive, comfortably watching television. He instructed the weeping parents to check their mail. And then the line went dead. The letter arrived. It wasn't a ransom note demanding cash. It wasn't a collage of magazine clippings. It had been written by Sherry herself, in her own distinctive, looping handwriting. The title at the top of the page froze the blood of the investigators' last will and testament. The killer had forced a terrified teenager to sit down and pen her own final goodbye to the world. But despite the coercion, the words were undeniably Sherry's. It was a heartbreaking, agonizingly brave document filled with pure expressions of love for her family, a plea for them not to despair, and a final, haunting request that they hold a closed casket funeral. The phone calls did not stop. The killer had locked his jaws into the psychology of the Smith family, and he refused to let go. "Do you believe me now?" The distorted voice taunted over the line. "Well, I'm not really sure I believe you," the desperate mother pleaded, "because I haven't heard any word from Sherry, and I need to know that Sherry is well." "You'll know in 2 or 3 days," the voice replied. "Why 2 or 3 days?" "Call the search off." Over the next agonizing week, the phantom caller tormented the family. He spoke in cryptic, quasi-religious riddles, heavily implying that Sherry was still drawing breath. He would read lines from her last will over the phone, savoring the power he held. "Became one soul," the voice whispered into the receiver during a 4-0 call, brushing aside the mother's desperate pleas for her daughter's life with a chilling sign-off. "Lovin' miss you. Get good rest tonight. Goodbye." He was a predator feeding on raw anguish, operating under the delusion that he was a god deciding the fate of mortals. 6 days after snatching the teenager from her driveway, the game changed. He called one final time, abandoning the riddles for terrifyingly precise coordinates. "Take Highway 378 west to Traffic Circle," the voice commanded. "Take Prosperity exit. Go 1.5 miles. Turn right at sign Moose Lodge No. 103. Go a 1/4 mile. Turn left at White Frame Building. Go to backyard. 6 feet beyond. We're waiting. God chose us." The coordinates lead the tactical teams directly into a dense, overgrown wooded area in Saluda County. There, hidden in the brush, they found the lifeless body of Sherry Faye Smith. Forensics determined she had been murdered a mere 12 hours after her abduction. The investigators knew they were dealing with a malignant narcissist who desperately craved the spotlight. They laid a psychological trap. They organized a massive, highly publicized outdoor memorial service for Sherry. Mourners were encouraged to leave flowers, teddy bears, and handwritten letters at the site. The detectives hid in the shadows, absolutely certain that a killer this arrogant wouldn't be able to resist returning to the scene to claim a sick memento of his handiwork. He never showed. But the torment continued. The killer pivoted his obsession. He began relentlessly calling the house, specifically demanding to speak with Sherry's sister, Dawn. The calls were obsessive, graphic, and designed to inflict maximum psychological torture. He described to Dawn exactly how her sister had died. He boasted that he had allowed the 17-year-old to choose her own method of execution. He painted a horrific picture of wrapping thick silver duct tape round and round her entire head until her oxygen supply was completely severed. He then began to whisper that Dawn was next. The physical resemblance between the two sisters was striking. Investigators theorized the monster had actually intended to kidnap Dawn on that fateful afternoon and snatch Sherry by mistake. But Dawn Smith was made of iron. Unflinching in the face of the man who suffocated her sister, she answered every single call. She kept him talking, listening to his madness, praying he would let a detail slip. And finally, the monster's ego tripped him up. He grew lazy. He stopped using the device to distort his voice. And during one particularly chilling conversation, he confidently asked Dawn, "Have you heard about Deborah May Helmick, the 10-year-old? Am I speaking?" Richland County. On June 14th, exactly 2 weeks after Sherry was taken, a 9-year-old girl named Deborah was snatched from her front yard in nearby Richland County. A silver car had violently accelerated toward the playing child. A man had dragged her into the cab and sped off into the afternoon. 8 days later, the caller contacted the Smith family again, providing the exact coordinates to find the little girl's body, cementing the terrifying reality that a serial killer was operating in the county. But the ultimate downfall of the killer did not come from his voice. It came from the very document he used to torture the family, Sherry's last will and testament. Forensic experts brought the handwritten letter into a sterile laboratory. They utilized a piece of technology known as an electrostatic detection device. This machine applies an electrical charge and toner to paper, revealing the invisible, microscopic indentations left behind by a pen pressing down on the sheet above it on a notepad. As the toner swept across Sherry's final goodbye, faint, ghostly lines began to appear. It wasn't a confession. It was a mundane list. Someone had used the notepad to jot down a series of names and phone numbers. One phone number, no missing a single digit, stood out. Detectives manually dialed every possible numerical combination until, finally, the line connected. A young man answered. When detectives pressed him about any ties to South Carolina, he provided the names of his parents, Ellis and Sharon Shepard, a couple whose primary residence sat a mere 15 miles from the Smith family driveway. The police tracked down the Shepards. The couple confirmed they had been away on a long vacation during the exact window of Sherry's abduction. The detectives pressed play on the recording of the undistorted voice from the phone calls. The Shepards gasped. The identification was immediate and absolute. The voice belonged to the man they had hired to house at their property while they were out of town. A 35-year-old local with a deeply troubling history of harassment and indecent exposure. His name was Larry Gene Bell. The Shepards recounted how, upon their return, Bell had seemed highly agitated, vibrating with a manic energy, intensely fixated on the news of the missing local teenager. Ellis Shepard looked at the electrostatic printout of the phone numbers and confirmed that it was the emergency contact list he had personally written out and left on the kitchen counter for Bell. The pieces slammed together with terrifying clarity. Bell hadn't taken Sherry to a dark basement or an abandoned warehouse. He had dragged the terrified teenager into the comfortable, suburban home of his employers, using their sanctuary as his personal torture chamber, confident that the police would never think to search a respectable family's house. On June 27th, 28 days after Bob Smith watched his daughter pull into the driveway, heavily armed tactical units kicked down the door and dragged Larry Gene Bell out in handcuffs. His trial was a circus of the absurd. Bell screamed at the judge, spouted religious nonsense, and desperately tried to paint himself as legally insane. The jury saw right through the theatrical madness. It took them less than an hour of deliberation to sentence him to death. A year later, the hammer fell again for the murder of little Deborah May Helmick. On October 4th, 1996, Larry Gene Bell was strapped into the heavy oak of the electric chair. When asked for his final words, the man who had spent hours tormenting families over the phone finally had nothing to say. The silence he left behind is the only justice a monster like that deserves. Thank you for listening. Keep your porch lights on, stay vigilant, and remember that sometimes the most dangerous things in the dark are the people trying to pull you into it. Good night. To understand the absolute depravity of the story, I am about to tell you, you first need a brief lesson in art history. In the 1920 seconds and 30 seconds, a movement was born in Japan known as Goro, or Irogoro. The term Goro is simply a Japanese corruption of the English word grotesque. Originally, this was an avant-garde, boundary-pushing artistic movement. Creators used unsettling, gory, and visceral imagery to explore the dark, often traumatic themes of the nation's history. By the time the 60 seconds and 70 seconds rolled around, this aesthetic was co-opted by radical filmmakers and underground manga artists. They wanted to hold a mirror up to the absolute ugliest, most carnal, and vilest aspects of human nature. But art evolves, or, depending on where you stand, it devolves. Fast forward to the modern digital era, and the Irogoro movement has mutated into a deeply niche, highly controversial internet subculture. Today, it primarily consists of digital artists sharing incredibly graphic illustrations of fictional anime and manga, characters being mutilated or dismembered. For many within this community, the interest is purely aesthetic, a morbid fascination with macabre art. However, for a disturbing subset of this subculture, the focus is heavily on the ero portion of the term. Let's not mince words. They sexualize the grotesque. Thanks to the inescapable gravity of Rule 34, dark corners of the internet have formed, where individuals obsess over lifeless, fictional, anime women. This brings us to Goro-chan. Launched in 2004, Goro-chan was a dedicated image board built specifically as a sanctuary for both types of Goro enthusiasts. It quickly swelled into the largest hub on the internet for this specific brand of extreme, illustrated horror. Now I must emphasize a crucial point. Despite how horrifying the premise of the site sounds, the overwhelming majority of its user base drew a hard, unbreakable line at reality. They had absolutely zero interest in real-life, violence, or snuff material. From the day the servers went live, the site enforced one absolute, non-negotiable rule: artwork only, no real-life images of death. But rules on the internet are fragile things, and on November 15th, 2007, an anonymous user utterly shattered that rule. The user created a thread titled, simply and chillingly, "I am Mouth Girl." Within this thread, the original poster, the uploaded a morbid collection of 10 high-resolution photographs. These were not drawings. These were not digital renders. They were real. The images featured the corpse of a young woman lying on a cold, steel gurney. In internet lore, she would soon become known as Dissected Chan, or DC. The photographs are the stuff of profound nightmares. They display hurt, or so brutally split open from the chest down. Her internal organs are entirely exposed to the harsh lighting. Her brain has been surgically removed from her skull. In the background of one of the shots, the feet of a second, male corpse can be seen lying on the same table, facing the opposite direction. What made the images so deeply unsettling was the condition of the woman's body. She appeared terrifyingly fresh. Her skin possessed a waxy sheen, but she looked almost as if she could sit up and speak. Her eyes were open, staring vacantly at the ceiling. Her mouth hung slightly agape. But the horror was not merely anatomical. The photographer had posed her. In several images, the dead woman's head was physically manipulated to stare directly into the camera lens. The most harrowing photograph in the collection, the one that earned the thread its title, was an extreme close-up of her face. The photographer had taken one of her own dislodged eyeballs and violently stuffed it into her open mouth. Another image showed the hands of the cameraman casually inserting medical needles into her lifeless flesh. And yet, those were not the most abhorrent photos in the collection. The most sickening images were those in which the photographer documented himself actively sexually violating the young woman's mutilated remains. The moderators of Goro-chan reacted with immediate, visceral disgust. They nuked the thread from the servers almost instantly and permanently IP-banned the user. But 5 minutes is an eternity on the internet. The moment the op was banned from the artboard, he pivoted. He took the 10 photographs and uploaded them directly to 4chan's infamous, entirely unmoderated B-board, the random board, a notorious cesspool of the internet's darkest impulses. And there, free from the constraints of moderation, the monster provided a detailed, gloating explanation. He wrote, "Ever wanted to see how Irogoro look alike in the real? This poor girl died just yesterday. Her name was Alex. She was 19 and she died of. So I played a little with a little dead body of her. She did not complain at all." He concluded the post with a statement of pure, sociopathic malice. "I was all laughing inside when I gave her body to her parents. She was all cleaned up and with makeup just like alive. They were just stunned by her death. Such a tragedy. And I was all laughing inside." The original Goro-chan post is lost to the digital void. But the B thread, that thread survived for years. It was accessible right up until April of this year, when a rival image board hacked and temporarily downed for Chan's servers. Archived versions still float around the dark web. But I strongly advise you, do not go looking for them. Because the true horror of that thread is not just the images of a desecrated corpse. The true horror is the reaction of the audience. On B, the user was not banned. He was not condemned. He was celebrated. The anonymous horde cheered him up. They treated the images like a trophy. One user replied, "This is awesome. I love you Anon. Only thing to outdo this would be to find her parents and mail the images to them. I certainly hope this guy won't get caught. Anyone who participates in his tracing and contacting the law enforcement is an ugly rat." While the majority of B users engaged in this sickening circle of edgelord mockery, a smaller faction of internet sleuths decided to hunt the up down. They extracted the metadata from the original image files. The data revealed a terrifying truth. The photographs had been taken just one single day before they were uploaded to the internet. This completely destroyed the theory that these were old, recycled cartel photos, or obscure medical training images dredged up from the deep web. The man who posted them had taken them, and the girl was freshly dead. The op claimed her name was Alex, that she was 19, and that she had died the day before the post. Assuming he wasn't lying about the timeline, amateur detectives began scouring international obituaries and news reports from November 14th, 2007. They found a single, haunting lead. A 19-year-old woman named Kelly Nascimento had died in a tragic car accident in Florida on November 11th, plunging into a canal. The age matched perfectly. The timeline was terrifyingly close. Could Alex just be an alias for Kelly? It was a desperate theory, but it quickly fell apart. When sleuths compared public photos of Kelly Nascimento to the horrific images of dissected Chan, the biometric markers didn't align. The structure of the nose was different. The eye color did not match. Furthermore, forensic linguists analyzing the op's gloating text noticed distinct anomalies. The grammar was stilted. The phrasing was awkward. Words were missing. It read like the broken English of a non-native speaker. The investigation pivoted away from the United States. They began to analyze the environment captured in the photographs. What kind of room was this? Some users pointed out a blurry shape in the background of one photo, suggesting the presence of an accomplice's boot. Others argued it was simply the base of a medical table. However, everyone agreed on the setting. This was a professional medical facility. The art story implied it was a hospital morgue or autopsy suite. But the distinct cracked hexagonal tiles on the floor looked old, institutional, perhaps belonging to an underfunded medical school or an older European hospital. This geographic detail is crucial. In the United States, human remains, whether victims of trauma or cadavers donated to science, are typically stored in highly secured, heavily monitored facilities. The idea that a rogue employee could spend hours mutilating, posing, and photographing a corpse without interruption seemed highly improbable in a modern American hospital. The consensus shifted toward Eastern Europe or perhaps the Netherlands, though the exact reasoning for this specific geographic profiling remains lost in the deleted archives. But what if the geographic profile was wrong? What if this wasn't an isolated incident in Eastern Europe? What if this was the work of a prolific, highly organized predator operating in the United Kingdom? There is one name that perfectly fits the profile of a necrophiliac monster operating within a hospital setting during that exact era: David Fuller. David Fuller is one of the most depraved serial killers in British history. In 1987, operating in the affluent town of Royal Tunbridge Wells, he broke into the homes of two young women, 25-year-old Wendy Nell and 20-year-old Caroline Pierce, and strangled them to death. He evaded justice for 23 agonizing years until advancements in DNA technology finally caught up to him. During those 2 decades of freedom, Fuller lived a terrifying double life. To the outside world, he was a mild-mannered, ordinary family man working as an electrician. That his day job gave him the ultimate hunting ground. He secured employment doing electrical maintenance at 2 local hospitals. When the police finally raided his home in 2020, they discovered 4 hidden hard rock drives taped securely behind a heavy chest of drawers. What those detectives found on those drives is almost beyond human comprehension. Between the years of 2007 and 2020, David Fuller had amassed a digital library of absolute horror. The drives contained thousands of photographs and videos of Fuller personally sexually assaulting the corpses of 101 different female bodies. The victims ranged in age from 9 years old to 100. Fuller utilized his staff's white card to access the hospital mortuaries during the dead of night. When the pathologists went home, the electrician entered the cold rooms, pulled the bodies from the drawers, and committed unspeakable violations, documenting every second of it. The sheer volume of evidence was staggering. It took a team of 9 hardened detectives 5 grueling months to catalog the contents of those drives. The psychological toll on those officers must have been immense. Fuller was meticulous. He categorized his atrocities into digital folders with sickening titles like Necrolord and Best of the Two. Other folders were labeled with the actual names of the deceased women, names he had learned by casually reading their confidential hospital charts. The investigation revealed he would even go home and stalk the social media profiles of the dead women, researching who they were in life before violating them in death. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Fuller pled guilty to the 2 1987 murders and the 101 mortuary violations. Standing in the dock, he muttered, "I want to admit. I am admitting the offenses, but I don't really want to go into detail, yeah." The judge handed down a whole life order. David Fuller will die in a concrete box. During the sentencing, Justice Scheme McGrubb delivered a blistering condemnation that captured the sheer inhumanity of his crimes. Among those you abused were women who lead fulfilling and rich lives. They were the best. A number have worked in hard professions such as teaching or in the NHS, caring for others. And all had families they nurtured and loved. Some spent the last parts of their lives in suffering. But they didn't lose their dignity until you decided to take it from them. The depravity of what you did to those you killed and those you defiled after death reveals that your conscience is seared. The authorities immediately destroyed every single image found on those hard drives. While they managed to identify most of the victims, 10 of the women Fuller violated remain unidentified to this day. This brings us back to the horrific images of dissected Chan. Could she be one of Fuller's 10 unknown victims? The timeline aligns perfectly. Fuller began his mortuary campaign in 2007. The images appeared on 4chan in November of 2007. Many internet sleuths are convinced that the mouth girl up was David Fuller. But if we look closer at the evidence, the theory begins to fracture. First, the broken English of the B post. While Fuller could have easily faked a foreign accent to throw off investigators, it seems an unnecessary step for a man who operated with such brazen arrogance. But the strongest evidence against Fuller lies in the physical state of the body. David Fuller was an electrician. He preyed on bodies that were stored in the mortuary fridges, awaiting burial or autopsy. He did not have medical training. Dissected Chan was photographed mid-autopsy. Her torso was surgically split, her internal organs were exposed, and her brain had been removed from her skull cavity. For Fuller to be the photographer, we have to believe a highly trained medical pathologist halted a complex autopsy right in the middle of the procedure, left the mutilated body completely exposed on the steel table, turned off the lights, and went home for the night, allowing an electrician to wander in. That violates every protocol of medical science. A doctor does not leave a body in that state overnight. Furthermore, the environment doesn't match. The cracked, filthy hexagonal tiles visible in the photos do not resemble the sterile, modern environment of a hospital mortuary in the affluent town of Royal Tunbridge Wells. And finally, David Fuller was a hoarder. He kept his trophies hidden behind a chest of drawers for his own private, sick consumption. There is absolutely no evidence that he ever uploaded his crimes to the internet or shared them with anyone. The grim and inescapable reality is far more terrifying. It is almost certain that the person who took those photographs of dissected Chan was the very medical professional tasked with performing her autopsy. The pathologist, the person trusted with the dignity of the dead, was the monster. To this day, the true identity of the woman on the table remains a mystery. The identity of the man who defiled her and loved, as he handed her back to her parents, remains unknown. But the lingering horror of the dissected Chan story is not just the act itself. It is the ecosystem that allowed it to thrive. The internet has not changed since 2007. Just last month, before the 4chan servers were temporarily down, another photograph surfaced on the B-board. It showed a Vietnamese woman, freshly butchered in a bedroom with her husband. The killer had placed a handwritten piece of paper next to her corpse, detailing the date, the time, and the name of the message board to prove it wasn't a fake. And the reaction? The exact same chorus of edgy jokes, gleeful rape posts, and sociopathic appreciation. The monsters are not just the ones wielding the knives or the needles. Sometimes, they are the ones sitting quietly behind a keyboard, laughing in the dark. For our final story, we shift gears. We move away from the visceral horror of the physical world and step into the surreal, paranoid labyrinth of the digital age. Imagine for a moment that you open your email inbox. Amidst the promotional spam and work memos, you see a message from a sender you do not recognize. The name is completely bizarre. You click on it. You expect a phishing scam or a generic advertisement. Instead, you are hit with a tidal wave of data. Attached to the email are dozens of video files, heavy feds, GIFs, and PNGs. You open the text. It is a massive, sprawling, incoherent essay. It jumps wildly from local news topics to cryptic, paranoid phrases, and occasionally reads like a deeply personal, terrifying confession. If this has happened to you, congratulations. You have just been Tuts Honeyworth-ed. The mystery began quietly about 6 years ago on a small, niche subreddit called Our Fake Names. A user going by the handle ZUBZSub30 created a post containing only 2 words, Tuts Honeyworth. The user explained that this bizarre name had appeared in their inbox attached to a deeply unsettling, nonsensically mail. Assuming it was a pseudonym, they posted it to the subreddit, hoping someone could shed light on the strange correspondence. For years, the post sat in the digital graveyard, completely ignored. And then, out of nowhere, the thread exploded. Users began flooding the comments, all sharing the exact same bizarre experience. They too had received massive, rambling emails from someone claiming to be Tuts Honeyworth. As the digital detectives of Reddit began comparing notes, a staggering reality took shape. For nearly 2 decades, this phantom entity had been systematically bombarding hundreds of thousands of random individuals across the globe with an endless stream of digital noise. Check your inbox right now. Type Tuts Honeyworth into the search bar. There is a very real chance you have received one of her manifestos and simply deleted it as spam. But those who didn't delete it found themselves dragged into a bizarre, paranoid rabbit hole. One user on the Reddit thread revealed that they and their entire friend group had been targeted with massive, homemade virtual newspapers. Some of these digital dossiers contained over 500 slides of dense information. The content was a schizophrenic collage. It heavily focused on Hawaiian local news, but wildly pivoted to deep dives on celebrities, politicians, convicted serial killers, and vast, sprawling conspiracy theories. The text itself was deeply unsettling. Tuts frequently fixated on themes of demonic possession, the existence of doppelgangers and decoys, psychic mind control, and the terrifying concept that a person could be reincarnated while their original body was still alive. What made the emails truly chilling, however, was the personalization. Some recipients reported that Tuts addressed them directly by their actual first and last names. Another user shared a surreal anecdote. Their girlfriend received an email from Tuts that appeared to be a job application. But when she opened the attached resume, It wasn't a list of work experience. It was a highly detailed, manic document chronicling a string of brutal murders from the 1970s. Anyone who attempted to reply to Tuts, begging for context or demanding to be removed from the mailing list, was met with absolute silence. The emails were a one-way street. If you analyze the attachments, a fractured, paranoid autobiography begins to emerge. Tuts repeatedly claims that she formerly worked as a federal security officer at an airport, but she alleges that between the years of 2006 and 2015, she was actively stalked, captured, and forcefully disappeared by unknown entities. She frequently references specific individuals of Hawaiian, Portuguese, and Japanese descent, claiming they share her heritage. She name-drops her alleged family members and former high school classmates. When internet sleuths investigated these names, they discovered something chilling. They were not fictional characters. Every single person that's mentioned was a real, living human being with a verifiable, genuine link to her past. These real names were violently mixed into a blender of philosophical musings, profound paranoia, and utterly incomprehensible grammar. Reading a Tuts Honeyworth email is like trying to decipher contagion of dyslexia. But buried within the madness was a terrifying level of organization. Tuts routinely attached massive, sprawling lists of names and mail addresses to her manifestos. These were not randomly generated. They belonged to top-tier government institutions, high-level corporate executives, journalists, and tens of thousands of ordinary civilians. Why was she targeting these specific people? One Reddit user, operating under the name OneSprinkles1894, highlighted the sheer, aggressive capability of the spam campaign. I work for an organization in Hawaii with top-tier InfoSec, unpublished emails on a private server, Global Protect VPN, and we all get the Tuts Honeyworth emails on the regular. This wasn't a simple bot scraping public domains. Tuts was penetrating secure, private networks. A prominent YouTuber named Kolak, he recently produced a deep dive investigation into the Tuts phenomenon. Exactly 1 week after he published the video, his private inbox lit up. It was Tuts. She had watched the video, tracked down his contact information, and began actively messaging him. The emails themselves are routed through dozens of different, constantly shifting addresses. They all follow a specific naming convention, beginning with the letters Thon, presumably T for Tuts and Han for Honeyworth. Bizarrely, many of these addresses utilize mail.ru, an antiquated Russian email service that is notoriously difficult to trace. So, who is the woman behind the keyboard? A deep dive into public records reveals that Tuts Honeyworth is not a pseudonym. She is a real, living woman. She was born Trudy Rosa Honeyworth, but legally changed her first name to Tuts. She maintains a ghostly presence across social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, but she never shows her actual face. Her profile pictures are exclusively stolen images of supermodels like Adriana Lima. In one of her more coherent emails, she attempts to explain this bizarre, catfish behavior in Silicon Valley. Well-behaved honey churches are 100% white with blonde hair and blue eyes. She frequently alludes to the delusion that she was reborn in Silicon Valley. Her Instagram account boasts nearly 23,000 followers, but for a long time, she only followed a single, solitary account. That account belonged to Mike Misk. Mike Misk Jr. was a notorious, highly dangerous organized crime boss based in Honolulu. He was indicted on massive federal charges, including racketeering and the presumed murder of a man named Jonathan Fraser. But before the hammer of justice could fall, Misk was found dead in his jail cell. Tuts is obsessed with him. In her emails, she demands that Misk's federal case be entirely thrown out. Her reasoning: the 4 children of the 1978 serial killer already learned how to move individuals uncontrollably, eliminate others. This is the core of her profound paranoia. Tuts genuinely believes that certain malevolent individuals possess the psychic ability to control the thoughts and actions of others, forcing people to commit suicide or implanting fatal diseases into their bodies via curses. She has flooded Reddit threads regarding the Mike Misk case, expressing genuine, terrified belief that these psychic assassins will target her next. But the most bizarre chapter of her verifiable life occurred in 2016. Tuts Honeyworth ran for the United States Senate in Hawaii as a Democratic candidate. It was not a joke. Her candidacy is heavily documented in public voting records. She secured exactly 1% of the vote. During her doomed political campaign, she launched a website. And on that website, she finally provided an explanation for her relentless, decade-long spam campaign. She wrote, before bed, during milk and cookies with technology. A computer. I would introduce myself to different educational universities of complete staff directories around the world. I have introduced myself emailing educational universities of entire staff directories, amongst 1,000+ professors at each university, 300 different and repeating universities per month from 2008 till to date. She explicitly admitted to systematically harvesting the private staff and student directories of Stanford, Oxford, Yale, Princeton, and hundreds of other global institutions, bombarding them with her personal concerns. But what exactly is she trying to say? Some internet sleuths believe she is a digital prophet. They theorize that the bizarre grammar and broken syntax are actually a complex cipher, that the first letter of every line spells out a warning about a massive government conspiracy encoded to bypass global surveillance algorithms. Others lean toward a more grounded, though equally dark, theory. Remember her obsession with the 1978 serial killer. In 1978, a woman named Marlys Honeyworth and her two children vanished without a trace. Years later, their dismembered bodies were discovered stuffed into industrial steel barrels in Bear Brook, New Hampshire. They had been slaughtered by a notorious serial killer named Terry Rasmussen. Tuts frequently references the Bear Brook murders in her manifestos, stating, "Honey churches don't belong in New Hampshire," and attaching morbid slideshows detailing Rasmussen's victims. Many believe that Tuts is a distant relative of Marlys Honeyworth, and the trauma of those brutal murders completely fractured her psyche. In her delusion, she believes she is mass emailing the world to raise awareness about her slaughtered family members, but her severe mental illness prevents her from communicating the message coherently. She has even begun accusing her former high school classmates of being the literal reincarnations of the serial killer, Terry Rasmussen. Is Tuts Honeyworth a whistleblower operating in code? Is she a broken woman crying out for justice for her murdered family? Or is she simply a tragedy of severe, untreated schizophrenia, armed with an internet connection and a staggering lack of boundaries? After 20 years and hundreds of thousands of emails, we are no closer to the truth. The only person who truly understands the matrix of Tuts Honeyworth is Tuts herself. And she is not answering questions, she is only broadcasting. So check your spam folder. She might be talking to you right now. Thank you for joining me in the dark. Be safe. Mind what you click on. And I will see you all again very soon.